She thought it was just another junked relic sinking into the Louisiana mud, a forgotten Cadillac buried in the swamp, swallowed by time and silence. But when female mechanic Loretta Barnes brushed away the moss and saw the car's chrome emblem glint beneath the water, she had no idea what she was about to uncover. Inside the Cadillac lay a sealed envelope, a weathered journal, and a shocking secret that had been buried for half a century. What she found wasn't just a car, it was a confession from the past, waiting for one brave woman to bring it to light. But before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. Tucked away in the humid heartlands of southern Louisiana, Loretta Barnes, 50, carved out a life most women wouldn't dare to dream of. With grease under her nails and calluses earned from years beneath rusted hoods, she ran her own auto repair shop at the edge of the bayou, just her, a stubborn old dog named Max, and a dozen unfinished car projects. Loretta wasn't always a mechanic. She once wore business suits in Houston, chasing deadlines in air-conditioned offices. But after her divorce and her father's sudden passing, she returned home to reclaim the garage he left behind, and never looked back. In this quiet town where gossip flowed faster than the bayou's current, Loretta was both admired and misunderstood. Folks called her the Grease Angel, a woman who could rebuild a V8 engine faster than most men could change a tire. But behind that steel exterior was someone still healing from life's dents and scratches. One misty morning, while searching for old scrap near an abandoned dock, she saw something glint beneath the surface chrome, buried in thick swamp moss. It was a Cadillac, and what lay inside that forgotten machine was about to shake her world to its core. Loretta stood at the water's edge, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, eyes locked on the silver glint barely visible through the murky swamp water. The sun hadn't yet burned off the early morning mist, and the thick silence around her made the moment feel unreal. But she knew what she was looking at. That unmistakable curve, the tail fin, the emblem. It was a Cadillac Fleetwood, mid-1960s. But what the hell was it doing half submerged in the middle of nowhere? Loretta's mechanic brain kicked into overdrive. Cadillacs from that era were beasts, heavy frames, thick steel bodies. No way it got here by accident. Someone put it here, and judging by how deep it was buried in moss and muck, it had been here for decades. She didn't hesitate. Within the hour, she was back with her tow truck, heavy-duty winch, chains, and a crowbar. Her dog Max sat in the passenger seat, panting, watching curiously as Loretta hooked the winch line to the undercarriage. The mud fought back. The swamp didn't want to give it up. The winch groaned, pulling inch by inch. As the car rose, the water turned black with stirred-up silt and rot. At one point, the cable snapped, slicing through the air and leaving a welt on Loretta's arm, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Something inside her said this was more than just a sunken car. By late afternoon, the Cadillac sat on dry land, or as dry as Louisiana swampland could be. It was in surprisingly good condition, though decades of decay had left its mark. Paint blistered, windows cracked, tires rotted to threads. But it was intact. And the license plate, though barely legible, made her stomach drop. TRV 724, Lafayette. She didn't know why, but that combination stirred something in her memory. Her father used to talk about Lafayette, about a car that disappeared, and a story no one wanted to tell. Shaking the thoughts off, Loretta forced the driver's door open. It creaked, groaned, then gave way. The inside smelled of mildew and secrets. Old leather, long since ruined, faded red upholstery, but no blood, no bones, nothing. until she reached the glove box. It was locked. With trembling hands, she wedged a flathead screwdriver into the seam and popped it open. Inside was a single key and a faded envelope, sealed with wax. The initials E.M. were embossed on the corner. She turned the key over in her fingers. Not a car key. Too small. A chest key. A locker key. The envelope felt thick, weighty. She hesitated, then peeled the wax open. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in slanted cursive on yellowed paper. If you are reading this, I didn't make it. My name is Elijah Moore, and I did not steal that car. I did not take her. They buried the truth to protect a name, a legacy, a family built on lies. I never had a voice. Maybe you'll be mine. Loretta's hands shook. Elijah Moore. That name meant something. She rushed home. The letter pressed against her chest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the bayou. Max barked twice as they passed the old churchyard, as if sensing what she already felt. That this wasn't just a car. This was a grave, a monument to a truth buried long ago. That night, in her dimly lit garage, surrounded by oil cans and fan belts, Loretta did what she hadn't done in years. She opened her father's old box of clippings and papers. He'd been a small-town reporter back in the 60s, obsessed with cases no one cared about. And there it was. Headline: 1968. Young mechanic accused in mayor's daughter disappearance. Subtext: Elijah Moore. 22 last seen with Evelyn Hartley, daughter of Mayor Charles Hartley. Neither have been found. Loretta stared at the photo of Elijah smiling, broad-shouldered, covered in engine grease. He looked not unlike the boys she trained at her shop. Then she saw it, the car in the background, a Cadillac Fleetwood, burgundy. Her heart dropped. This was that car, and Elijah never got to tell his side of the story. The article mentioned that Evelyn was last seen getting into a car with Elijah. Rumors spread like wildfire. She was white. He was black. It was Louisiana in 1968. They said he ran. They said he killed her. No body. No trial. Just silence. And now this letter. This key. This proof that Elijah may have been innocent. Loretta stayed up all night, going over every word, every detail. She needed more. She needed to find the truth, because nobody else ever did. The Cadillac had stayed hidden for over 50 years, but fate or something bigger had dragged it back into the light, and it had chosen her to do something about it. She didn't know where the key led, but she knew the story wasn't over. By sunrise, Loretta hadn't slept. She sat at her kitchen table, the key and the letter spread before her, along with newspaper clippings, maps, and old photos pulled from her father's filing boxes. The air was heavy with the scent of black coffee and swamp fog creeping in through the screen door. She kept rereading the letter. Thoriband. They buried the truth to protect a name, a legacy. It haunted her. She had grown up hearing whispers about the Hartleys, especially Mayor Charles Hartley, a man who'd built half the town with oil money and political connections. His daughter, Evelyn, vanished in 1968. No trace, no trial. The black mechanic she was seen with disappeared, declared guilty in the court of public opinion. But now she had proof: Elijah Moore's voice, crying out from the grave, and a key. A small brass key with an engraving on the side. DNR Storage, Unit 7. Loretta's pulse quickened. DNR Storage was a rundown facility on the edge of Houma, 30 minutes from her shop. She remembered it from years ago, a place where people stored boats, busted refrigerators, and sometimes secrets they never meant to unearth. She grabbed her keys, tossed a wrench in the passenger seat next to Max just in case, and drove off. The Cadillac's envelope locked in her glove box. The storage lot was nearly abandoned. Rusted fences lined the perimeter, and the manager's trailer looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint since the 80s. A crooked sign above the gate read, "DNR, no liability for theft or fire." Charming! Loretta parked beside Unit 7. The door was sealed with an ancient padlock. She slid the brass key into it, her hands trembling. It clicked. She took a deep breath. Max let out a low growl beside her, sensing something was off. Loretta opened the door. The unit was dark, musty, and filled with the smell of old paper and mildew. At first glance, it looked like any forgotten storage boxes stacked, furniture covered in dusty tarps. But something was strange. Everything inside looked carefully placed, not abandoned. There were no cobwebs, no signs of rodents. It was as if someone had been here recently. She reached for a box labeled E.M., Personal, and opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, receipts all belonging to Elijah Moore. There was a journal water-damaged, but legible detailing his time as an apprentice mechanic, his affection for Evelyn Hartley, and his fear that their secret relationship would destroy them both. She said she wanted to run away, but I knew they'd come after me. Not her. I knew I wouldn't make it out alive. Loretta's heart pounded. These weren't just keepsakes, they were evidence, buried to protect a powerful family's legacy. Then she saw it a second envelope, sealed just like the one in the Cadillac. This time, it was addressed, "To be opened only if I disappear." Her fingers trembled as she peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 names. 3 of them were crossed out. Sheriff Don Atwell, deceased 1989, Judge Hal Vernon, deceased 1993, Deputy Carl Young, missing 1972, Pastor Malcolm Green. Loretta blinked. This wasn't just a love affair gone wrong. This was a cover-up. And someone or multiple people helped bury it. The only name not marked was Pastor Malcolm Green. He would be in his 80s now, if he were still alive. She scribbled the name on a notepad and stood up only to hear a sharp clang outside the unit. Max barked furiously. Loretta froze. She walked out cautiously, her wrench in hand. The parking lot was empty, or so it seemed, but on the ground next to her truck was a single item. A bullet casing, still warm. She scanned the area. No one in sight. No vehicles. Just silence. Somebody had followed her. Somebody didn't want her opening that unit. She grabbed the journal, letters, and both envelopes, stuffed them into a duffel, and slammed the unit shut. Her hands were shaking as she drove away, constantly checking her rearview mirror. Back at the shop, she locked the documents in her father's old safe. She didn't know who she could trust. The people involved had long-reaching influence, and if even one of them was still around or had family protecting their name, she could be in real danger. Later that evening, Loretta did something she never thought she would. She posted the first photo of Elijah and Evelyn on her Facebook page, captioned only with, "2 people, 1 missing truth. Help me find the rest." Within an hour, it had over 2,000 shares. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some hateful, some claiming it was just another conspiracy, others urging her to go to the police. But then came a private message. "I remember Evelyn. I remember the night she vanished. I have something you need to see. But we can't talk online. Anonymous." Loretta stared at the message. Her gut told her this wasn't a troll. Someone out there remembered. Someone might finally be ready to talk. But who and why now? That night, as she locked up her shop and walked past the dusty Cadillac parked out back under a tarp, she whispered to herself, "You didn't run, Elijah. They buried you. And now, 50 years later, Loretta was going to dig the truth back up one name, one secret at a time. The following morning felt different. Not just because the air was heavy or the bayou was eerily still. Loretta herself had changed. Something inside her had cracked open. And in that space, where routine once lived, now burned a fire truth needed to be spoken. She sat at her workbench, hands black with oil after tuning up a customer's truck. But her mind wasn't on gears and gaskets anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about Elijah's journal, about the photos, the letter, the names, and especially the message from the stranger online. Her father had always told her, "You don't fix a broken engine by ignoring the noise. You open it up, look deep inside, and face whatever's busted." Maybe he wasn't just talking about cars. That afternoon, Loretta drove to the only place she hadn't looked yet, her father's old study in the back of the house. He'd passed away 10 years ago, and she'd left most of his boxes untouched out of respect. Or maybe guilt. Dust coated every surface. The smell of pipe tobacco still lingered in the walls. She ran her fingers over a bookshelf and found a thin binder labeled "Moore Case, Private Notes." Her chest tightened. She sat down on the floor and flipped it open. Inside were handwritten pages, typed notes, and photocopied documents. Her father had investigated the Elijah Moore case independently, even after the authorities had closed it. He had theories, dates, phone numbers. He'd interviewed people who were too afraid to speak publicly. Malcolm Green saw something. He confessed it to me in '81, told me the church kept secrets too. Said Evelyn tried to run, but not from Elijah. Loretta gasped. The same name again, Pastor Malcolm Green. Her father had even drawn a diagram, a timeline that connected names, events, and a large red X where the Cadillac had been found. She whispered aloud, "You were trying to tell the truth, weren't you?" Dad, he hadn't failed. He just didn't have the tools to finish it. But now she did. She called the anonymous message sender. A man answered. His voice trembled. "Is this Loretta Barnes, the mechanic who posted the photo?" "Yes, who is this?" "Name's Thomas Green. Pastor Malcolm was my grandfather. I was just a kid in '68, but I remember the night Evelyn Hartley disappeared. Grandpa never got over it. He left the church years later. Drank himself quiet. But before he died, he gave me a box. Told me to open it if the Cadillac ever came back." Loretta's hand tightened on the phone. "Do you still have it?" "Yeah, but we can't talk over the phone. Too many people still care about burying this story. Can you come to Lake Cormorant Church? Midnight tonight, come alone?" Her instincts screamed caution, but her soul said yes. She needed answers. And she needed them face to face. That night, under a pale moon and the hum of insects, Loretta pulled up to the abandoned Lake Cormorant Church. The steeple leaned slightly to the right, and the wooden doors groaned in the breeze. Thomas stood waiting in the doorway, mid-60s, slender, gray-bearded, clutching a tin lockbox like it held his entire world. "I knew you'd come," he said, eyes tired but kind. Inside the church, they sat in the front pew, lit by the beam of a single flashlight. Thomas opened the box. Inside were a cassette tape, labeled Confession, 1971. A stack of letters between Evelyn and Elijah, full of love, fear, and desperation. A photograph of Mayor Hartley with Sheriff Atwell and Judge Vernon standing in front of that very Cadillac. "My grandfather recorded this confession after Evelyn vanished," Thomas whispered. "He said she was pregnant. And when her father found out, he lost his mind." Loretta's throat tightened. She held the letters gently, almost reverently. Evelyn had written, "I don't want to hide anymore. Elijah, I don't want our love to be a shameful secret. Let's leave. I don't care where. I just want a life where we can breathe." Tears welled in Loretta's eyes. These weren't just stories. These were lives destroyed by silence, hatred, and power. Thomas handed her the tape. "You should be the one to share it. I'm too old, and too tired of being afraid." She nodded. "I will. I swear it." Driving home? Loretta didn't feel like a mechanic anymore. She felt like a messenger one that time had waited for. In the dark, she spoke aloud, as if to Elijah. "I thought I was just uncovering a mystery, but now I see. I've been handed a truth, and truth doesn't rest." The next morning, she posted again, this time a clip of the cassette recording, uploaded online with the caption, "This is the voice they tried to silence. 50 years of silence ends now." The video went viral. Thousands of comments. Journalists called. National news picked it up. Some still doubted. Some threatened her. But many more believed. Survivors from the old town began to share what they knew. Pieces finally began to fit. The town wasn't just remembering, it was reckoning. And Loretta, she was no longer just the lady with the wrench. She was a force of truth, a woman who'd stood where others had fallen, and refused to look away. The days that followed were a blur. Loretta never imagined that a single cassette tape and a long-forgotten love story could break the silence of a town or capture the attention of the entire nation. The video she posted, featuring the voice of Pastor Malcolm Green, recounting what he saw the night Evelyn Hartley vanished, had spread like wildfire. He spoke in a trembling voice, describing how he witnessed Mayor Hartley confronting his daughter and Elijah Moore near the bayou, shouting words laced with hate. He recalled Evelyn's terrified face, Elijah's calm defiance, and how the Cadillac drove off into the fog only to never return. "I wanted to speak up," Pastor Green said in the tape, "but I was told, very clearly, if you talk, you'll be buried deeper than that car." Within 72 hours, the FBI reopened the case. Investigators swarmed the bayou. Reporters lined the streets. Talk shows and news anchors demanded answers. Suddenly, the sleepy town of Bellefontaine, once known only for its catfish festival, became the center of a national reckoning. But through the chaos, Loretta stayed grounded. She still showed up at her shop each morning, grease-stained jeans and all, refusing to let the story turn her into a spectacle. When reporters knocked on her door, she didn't perform. She spoke simply, truthfully. "I didn't find a car. I found a man's voice and a town's silence, one of those needed to be heard." One morning, she received a visit from Mary Ann Caldwell, a civil rights attorney from New Orleans who had followed the story closely, tall, poised, and direct. She entered Loretta's garage with a folder and a mission. "Ms. Barnes," she began, "you didn't just uncover a case. You reopened a wound this country never stitched up properly. I believe you have something bigger to offer." Loretta raised an eyebrow. "Like what, I'm just a mechanic?" Marianne smiled. "Not anymore. You're not." Within 2 weeks, Loretta was invited to speak at a community justice panel in Baton Rouge. The topic: forgotten truths, community silence, and historical injustice. At first, she hesitated. She didn't care much for microphones or stages. But as she stood in front of hundreds of people, educators, survivors, activists, she realized something: this wasn't about fame. It was about giving others the permission to speak up. She told them the story of Elijah Moore, of Evelyn Hartley, of the Cadillac buried in the swamp, of the system that failed them both. "Sometimes the truth doesn't knock," she said into the microphone. "It rusts in the mud for 50 years, waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig it out." The room was silent. Then it erupted in applause. After the event, a young girl approached her about 17, eyes wide, clutching a small notebook. "Ms. Barnes," she whispered, My grandfather disappeared in 1971. No one ever looked for him. No one cared. But after your story, my mom finally talked about it. Thank you." Loretta's throat tightened. "You keep asking questions. Honey, even when they tell you not to." Word spread quickly. Universities reached out, asking Loretta to speak. Documentary filmmakers wanted to adapt the story. Civil rights groups offered to fund a memorial for Elijah and Evelyn, a permanent reminder that even buried stories can rise again. One of the most unexpected calls came from the Hartley family themselves. A man named Daniel Hartley, grandson of Mayor Charles Hartley, requested to meet. Loretta agreed cautiously. They met at the old town library, under the giant oak where Evelyn used to read as a child. Daniel arrived alone, holding a photo of Evelyn. He looked nervous. "I grew up hearing the sanitized version," he said quietly. "That she ran off, that Elijah was dangerous. But now, I see what we did, what he did." He handed Loretta the photo. "You deserve this. The world deserves the truth, and so did they." For the first time in weeks, Loretta felt something close to peace. But the biggest opportunity came not from the press, nor the protests, but from within the town itself. Bellefontaine's mayor, under pressure from the national spotlight, approached Loretta with a proposal. "We're creating a community history initiative. We want the next generation to know what really happened here, and we want you to lead it." Loretta stared at the offer. Lead it. She'd spent her life under cars, not behind podiums. But then she thought of Elijah, of Evelyn, of her father silenced in his time. Maybe it was her time now. She agreed on one condition. You build the memorial, right by the bayou, and you don't hide the names. The mayor nodded. And so, Loretta, once just a backwoods mechanic with a quiet shop and a louder wrench, became a voice for those forgotten, a bridge between generations, and a guardian of buried truths. But even as she stepped into this new role, she never gave up her garage. Because some days, healing looked like speeches and panels. And some days, healing looked like replacing a carburetor while a teenager asked, "Hey, Ms. Loretta, can you teach me how to fix an old Ford?" And she always answered, "Sure thing, but first, let me tell you a story." The memorial was nearly complete. Perched on the edge of the same swamp, where the Cadillac had been pulled from the mud. It stood quiet and unassuming, a polished stone slab beneath a canopy of cypress trees, engraved with two names, Elijah Moore, Evelyn Hartley, and just beneath them, a line chosen by Loretta herself. The truth may sink, but it never stays buried. She ran her fingers along the carved letters, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath her touch. The wind carried the scent of wet moss and old memory. It was the same place where she once stood with mud on her boots and her heart full of questions. Now, the questions had answers, but the answers had changed her forever. The weeks following the dedication had been surreal. Loretta had gone from being the mechanic lady to a local hero, and then to something even stranger, a symbol. She was invited to town halls, interviewed on podcasts, and even filmed for a streaming documentary series. But the attention wasn't what changed her. What changed her were the letters. Every week, her mailbox filled with handwritten notes. Some came from people who had lived through similar injustices, families who lost sons, daughters, fathers, lovers. Others were from young people, writing simply to say thank you for not staying quiet. One letter, however, was different. It came from a woman named Lillian, age 78, who had once worked in the Hartley home as a maid. She wrote, "I saw Evelyn crying on the stairs the night she disappeared. She told me she was going to leave with him and she was happy. I wanted to stop her, not because I didn't want her to be with Elijah, but because I knew what her father was capable of. I've lived with that guilt for 50 years. But after your story came out, I finally slept through the night. Loretta pressed the letter to her chest and cried not just for Evelyn and Elijah, not just for Lillian, but for herself. For the decades she had spent avoiding questions, for the pain she had inherited but never examined, for the silence that ran through her own bloodline. One evening, weeks after the memorial was unveiled, Loretta sat on her back porch, watching the bayou breathe under the moonlight. Max, her old dog, lay quietly at her feet. She took a sip of bourbon and pulled out her father's final notebook, the one she'd never fully read. The cover was frayed, the pages yellowed. Inside was a page dated just weeks before his death. "I think she's strong enough now. I never told Loretta everything because I wasn't sure she'd carry the weight. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe she was always stronger than me." Loretta's breath caught. Her father had known. All those years of him obsessing over the Elijah Moore case, it wasn't just journalistic curiosity. It was his way of trying to redeem himself not just as a reporter, but as a father who hadn't known how to raise a daughter in the middle of a broken world. She whispered, "You should have told me," then added, "But I found it anyway." The next day, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She sold her garage, not because she was giving up mechanics, never that, but because she wanted something more, a space where young people could learn not just how to fix cars, but how to listen, how to ask questions, how to build something lasting and truthful. She used the money to open the Moore Hartley Foundation, a nonprofit community center where teens from all backgrounds could learn skills, auto repair, carpentry, journalism, even local history. The first wall inside the building held 2 framed photos, one of Evelyn, smiling in the sun, and one of Elijah, hands covered in grease, holding a wrench. Underneath them was Loretta's motto: "We rebuild more than engines here. We rebuild voices." One afternoon, while teaching a class on rebuilding a 1967 Chevy Impala, a boy named Jaden, 15, quiet, always wearing earbuds, asked her, "Miss Loretta, do you ever wish you hadn't found the car?" She looked up from the engine, eyes glistening. "Every day," she said softly. "And every day, I'm grateful I did." Jaden paused, then nodded. "Same. I found out my uncle went missing in 1974. My mom never talked about it until your story. I'm trying to get her to tell me more." Loretta placed a hand on his shoulder. "Keep asking. Keep listening. The truth needs a home." And so, Loretta grew not by forgetting what she uncovered, but by embracing it, by allowing it to transform her. She no longer saw herself as a woman who simply fixed machines. She saw herself as someone who unlocked the jammed engines of history and helped them roar back to life. It was a crisp autumn morning when the town of Bellefontaine gathered once again by the edge of the swamp, not for protest, not for controversy, but for remembrance. Loretta stood before the newly completed Moore Hartley Memorial, a modest structure of stone and steel nestled beneath the towering cypress trees, where Spanish moss swayed like silent witnesses to time. The Cadillac, the very car that once lay buried in mud and silence, now sat carefully restored beside the memorial, a symbol of truth, dug up and reborn. Hundreds gathered old-timers with eyes full of regret, teenagers who had only known the story through whispers, activists, students, even the descendants of the same men who once buried that truth. Loretta stepped to the microphone, the wind brushing softly through her silver-streaked hair. Her voice was steady, low, firm, but thick with the weight of memory. "I didn't come here today to speak for Elijah Moore or Evelyn Hartley," she began. "They spoke for themselves long ago. It just took us 50 years to listen." A hush fell over the crowd. Cameras clicked, but no one looked away. Everyone wanted to hear her, not just her words, but her heart. "This town taught me how to fix things breaks belts, broken exhausts, but nothing in the world prepared me for fixing something like this. She paused, eyes scanning the faces, some tearful, some uncertain, all changed. The truth is messy. It makes enemies. It opens wounds. But it also sets people free. She looked towards the car, now gleaming under the sun. We buried more than a Cadillac in that swamp. We buried people's names, their dignity, their love. We buried a future we were too afraid to let exist. But not anymore. A soft wave of applause rose, unforced, from the back of the crowd. She held up a photograph, the one of Evelyn and Elijah, arms around each other, laughing, unafraid. This is what they tried to erase. But love doesn't rot. It waits. It fights back. And when you finally hear it, really hear it, it changes you. The crowd was silent again, hearts pounding in unison. They were young, they were in love, and they were punished for it. But not anymore. Loretta stepped back, folding the photo gently, pressing it against her chest. After the ceremony, the townspeople slowly lined up to touch the car, to read the plaque, to leave flowers, notes, small tokens of regret and hope. An elderly woman clutched Loretta's hand. "I was Evelyn's piano teacher," she whispered. "I should have asked more questions. I should have said something." Loretta simply nodded, eyes soft. "You're saying it now." Children ran barefoot across the grass, some too young to understand the depth of the moment, but old enough to feel its weight in the air. One little girl, maybe 7, turned to her father and asked, "Why's everyone crying?" He bent down, hugging her tight. "Because someone told the truth, sweetheart, and sometimes that's enough to start healing." In the weeks that followed, the Moore Hartley Foundation received letters from across the country. Families shared their buried stories. Teachers requested to add the story to their curriculum. A national archive offered to permanently house Elijah and Evelyn's letters, journals, and even the audio tape, so that it would never be forgotten again. And Loretta? She kept teaching carburetors and courage, wrenches and wisdom. Her classes grew. Young people came from neighboring counties to learn not just how to repair old engines, but how to ask the hard questions no one else wanted to face. One day, a quiet girl named Marley, 16, approached her after class. "Miss Loretta, I'm not sure if I want to be a mechanic, but I think I want to tell stories like you did." Loretta chuckled softly. "Then I hope you tell them loud, baby." "And true, even if people don't like it," Marley asked. Loretta kneeled, looking her in the eye. "Especially if they don't like it." That night, alone in her home with Max curled up at her feet, Loretta sat by the window. The swamp outside shimmered beneath the stars, no longer a place of secrets, but a resting place of peace. She opened the final letter Elijah had written, now yellowed but preserved in a glass frame. "If anyone finds this, I hope they know we loved. I hope they don't let fear win. And I hope someone tells our story even if it's 50 years too late." Loretta whispered, through tears and a smile, "I told it, Elijah! I told it!" And somewhere in that humid southern air, it felt like the bayou breathed back. In the heart of a forgotten town, under the shade of trees that had once stood silent through decades of injustice, the truth finally stood tall not as vengeance, but as a monument to love, courage, and the kind of healing that only comes when one person decides enough is enough. Loretta Barnes didn't just uncover a mystery. She gave voice to the voiceless. She rewrote the ending. And maybe she reminded us all that even the deepest secrets can't stay buried forever. As the late sun dipped behind the cypress trees of Bellefontaine, Loretta Barnes didn't return to her garage to close up shop. She sat quietly at the edge of the memorial, watching the wind ripple across the swamp, that had once hidden a tragedy now transformed into a place of truth and healing. In her lap was a fresh journal, not to record parts and repairs, but to outline a new program, one that would teach young people not just how to fix engines, but how to listen, question, and lead with courage. The secret she once uncovered didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been silenced, doubted, or told their story didn't matter. The small-town mechanic who was never meant to be heard had become the woman who taught others to raise their voice. Because for Loretta, and for those who follow, the truth wasn't the end of the road. It was the ignition. The end. Up next, 2 more unforgettable stories are waiting for you. Click to keep uncovering what matters, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe silence was never meant to win.